My name is Edis, and for most of my life, I thought I knew the truth about God. Born into a devout Muslim family, my days were shaped by prayer, devotion, and the firm belief that Islam was the ultimate truth. My parents instilled in me the principles of our faith from an early age. I recited the Quran, prayed 5 times daily, and attended the mosque every Friday. It was who I was, and I believed it was who I was meant to be. But even as I grew up, small questions began to take root in my mind. If Allah created all people, why did He only speak Arabic? Why did we have to face Mecca when we prayed? As though God needed such specific rituals? These thoughts were fleeting at first, quickly dismissed as distractions. After all, questioning too much felt dangerous, like I was walking toward a cliff edge with no way to stop myself from falling. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. When I went to college to study engineering, my world expanded in ways I hadn't expected. I met people from all walks of life: Christians, atheists, Hindus, and others. They spoke about their beliefs with conviction, and while I tried to convince them that Islam was the true way, I found myself unable to dismiss their arguments as easily as I had imagined. One person, in particular, stood out: Sophia. She was an Orthodox Christian, and her faith was unlike anything I had encountered before. The way she spoke about Jesus like He was more than a prophet, like He was alive and divine, confused and intrigued me. We often argued, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with my passionate defenses of Islam. I asked her why she believed in the Trinity, how God could be one and three at the same time. Why would God need to become a man? I demanded one day, couldn't He simply forgive sins if He wanted to? Sophia listened patiently, as she always did, and explained her beliefs. She never got angry, never tried to force me to agree with her. The more we talked, the more I found myself confused, not because her arguments were weak, but because they touched on something deeper. Out of curiosity, I started reading the Bible in secret. Some passages felt beautiful, even comforting, while others challenged everything I had been taught. I didn't tell my family about my growing questions. How could I? To them, Islam was the truth, the only truth, and I was their son who would carry that truth forward. But inside, I was torn. I wanted to know what was real, what was true, but I didn't know where to begin. One night, I had a dream that shook me to my core. I stood before 2 doors, one marked with the crescent moon of Islam and the other with a cross. A voice spoke, deep and commanding, saying, "Choose wisely, for your eternal destiny depends on it." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. From that moment on, I couldn't stop thinking about which door I would choose and what that choice would mean. The dream haunted me, its vividness replaying in my mind each time I closed my eyes. 2 doors, one with the crescent moon and the other with a cross, and the voice urging me to choose wisely. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being called to make a decision, though I didn't understand why. For days, I wrestled with the questions the dream had stirred. Was it a sign? A warning? Or just my subconscious grappling with the doubts I had suppressed for so long? I didn't know where to turn or who to ask. My parents, as much as I loved them, would never understand. To question Islam so deeply would feel like betrayal to them. In desperation, I prayed not specifically to Allah, but to whoever was truly out there. I wasn't even sure how to address this being anymore. My words were simple but heartfelt. Show me the truth. I just want to know what's real, no matter what it costs me. Sophia remained a steady presence in my life during this time. She didn't know about the dream, but she must have sensed my growing uncertainty. She continued to answer my questions about her faith with the same patience and kindness as always. "You seem different lately," she said one day as we sat outside the library. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I've just been thinking a lot," I admitted. "About faith?" she asked gently. I nodded. "I've been reading both the Quran and the Bible," I confessed. "I want to understand, but the more I read, the less I feel like I know." Sophia smiled softly. "That's not a bad thing, Edis. Sometimes, Realizing how little we know is the first step to finding the truth. Her words gave me some comfort, but they didn't resolve the tension that was growing inside me. As I studied the Quran with fresh eyes, I began noticing things I had once overlooked. Certain verses seemed inconsistent, and others raised more questions than answers. At the same time, parts of the Bible seemed to speak directly to my heart, stirring emotions I couldn't explain. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself flipping through the Gospel of John. I stopped at a passage where Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words struck me like a lightning bolt. Could it be true? Was Jesus truly the only way to God? But even as the possibility stirred hope in my heart, fear gripped me. What would happen if I embraced this truth? What would my family say? What would it cost me? My doubts and fears followed me like shadows, but I couldn't ignore the pull towards something greater. One day, Sophia invited me to attend a service at her church. "You don't have to decide anything," she said. "Just come and see." I wanted to go, but fear held me back. What if someone saw me? What if I was making a terrible mistake? I declined her invitation, but the longing to experience her faith firsthand lingered. As my questions deepened, so did my prayers. I begged God for clarity, for a sign that would point me in the right direction. I didn't want to live in this state of uncertainty anymore. Then came the day that changed everything. It started like any other normal Tuesday with classes and my part-time job at a local bookstore. I didn't know it would be the day I would face death and, in doing so, find the truth I had been searching for. I was restocking shelves in the philosophy section when a sharp pain shot through my chest. At first, I thought it was just heartburn from the spicy lunch I'd eaten, but the pain quickly worsened, spreading to my left arm. I felt dizzy and short of breath, the room spinning around me. I tried to call out for help, but no sound came out. The last thing I saw was my coworker, Mia, rushing toward me, her face filled with concern. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, or what felt like my eyes, I wasn't in the bookstore anymore. I was floating, weightless and free from pain. The world around me was dark, but in the distance, I saw a small pinprick of light. The light grew brighter, more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just white, it shimmered with all the colors of the spectrum, radiating warmth and peace. I felt drawn to it, as though an invisible force were gently pulling me closer. As I approached the light, I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I looked down and saw a glowing form, a shape made of light, not flesh. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt a peace that surpassed anything I had ever known. Music filled the air, unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a harmony that seemed to resonate in the core of my being. Then I heard a voice. It was powerful yet gentle, and it spoke not just to my ears, but to my very soul. "Welcome, Edis. Do not be afraid." I turned toward the voice and saw a figure standing in the center of the light. His presence was overwhelming, radiant with love and understanding. Though his features were different from the images I had seen in books or paintings, I knew without a doubt who he was. It was Jesus. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about God, faith, and life began to unravel. I stood there, or rather floated, in the presence of Jesus. The light radiating from him wasn't just something I could see, it was something I could feel. It wrapped around me like a warm embrace, dissolving every fear, every doubt, every shadow of confusion that had weighed me down. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but words seemed inadequate. As I looked into his eyes, I felt something I had never experienced before: pure, unconditional love. It was overwhelming, yet it didn't crush me. Instead, it lifted me, as though his very presence was calling me into something greater. "You have been seeking the truth, Edis," Jesus said, his voice gentle yet powerful. "Now, let me show you." With those words, scenes from my life began to unfold around us. I saw myself as a child, learning to recite the Quran, praying in the mosque, and memorizing verses with pride. I saw my teenage years, my arguments with Sophia, my moments of doubt and curiosity. "You were searching for me even then," Jesus said, "even when you didn't know it." I was there. His words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had felt torn between what I had been taught and what I felt deep in my heart. Now, it was as if those pieces were coming together, revealing a truth I had been too afraid to see. Then the scenes changed. I saw moments from Jesus' life, his miracles, his teachings, his gentle touch as he healed the sick and comforted the brokenhearted. I saw him standing before crowds, speaking words that seemed to resonate with the very core of creation. And then I saw the cross. I watched as Jesus carried the weight of the wooden beam, his body beaten and bloodied, his face etched with pain. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. As he was nailed to the cross and lifted into the air, I felt the weight of what was happening, not just physically, but spiritually. This is why I came, Jesus said, his voice filled with love and sorrow, to take the burden of sin upon myself, so that you and all of humanity could be reconciled to God. I felt the depth of his sacrifice in a way I had never understood before. It wasn't just an act of suffering, it was an act of love so profound that it reached across time and space. I saw the resurrection next, the empty tomb, and the joy of his followers as they realized he was alive. It wasn't just a story, it was real, more real than anything I had ever known. This is the truth. Eat us. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. As he spoke, I felt a deep sense of clarity. The questions that had haunted me, the doubts about Islam, the confusion about God's nature faded away. I understood now why Jesus had come, why God had taken on flesh. It wasn't just to teach us or guide us. It was to bridge the gap that sin had created, to restore the relationship between God and humanity. Jesus extended his hand toward me, and as I reached for it, I felt a surge of love and peace unlike anything I had ever known. Suddenly, the light around us shifted, and I found myself in a place so beautiful it defied description. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had seen on earth, and the air was filled with music that seemed to echo the harmony of creation itself. This is the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, gesturing to the breathtaking scene before me. This is what I have prepared for those who follow me. I saw people of every nation and language, their faces radiant with joy as they worshiped God together. There was no division, no hatred, no fear, only love and unity. As I stood there, awestruck, Jesus showed me the contrast. He revealed the flaws in the teachings I had once held dear. I saw the contradictions in the Quran, the historical realities that had been hidden or ignored, and the limitations of salvation through works. The paradise described in the Quran, with its focus on physical pleasures, seemed hollow compared to the profound spiritual fulfillment I witnessed here. I saw how Islam had misunderstood God's nature, reducing him to a being of power and will rather than the God of love and relationship I now stood before. This is the truth. Eat us, Jesus said again. And now, you must choose. Will you stay here with me, or will you return to share what you have seen and learned? Many need to hear the truth, and I have chosen you to be my witness. The thought of leaving this place, of returning to the pain and struggles of earth, was almost unbearable. I wanted to stay in this perfect peace, this overwhelming love, forever. But I also knew Jesus was right. I'll go back, I said, my voice trembling, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are not alone. Eat us, Jesus replied, his eyes filled with compassion. I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. With those words, the light around me began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back. His final words echoed in my heart. Be strong and courageous. You are mine, and I am with you. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. The fluorescent lights above me were harsh and jarring compared to the radiant light I had just experienced. My chest ached, and I felt weak, but I was alive. I knew, without a doubt, that my life would never be the same again. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the dull ache in my chest, a stark reminder of what had happened. The second was the stark contrast between the world I had just left and the one I had returned to. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room felt cold and harsh compared to the warmth of the light I had seen. My body was heavy and weak, a sharp contrast to the weightless peace I had experienced. A nurse stood by my side, her face etched with relief. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You've been through a lot." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. She offered me a small cup of ice chips, and as I sucked on them, memories of what I had seen began flooding back. Jesus, the light, the overwhelming love, the kingdom of heaven. It was all still so vivid, as though I had only just left. When I could finally speak, I asked the question that had been pressing on my mind. How long was I gone? The nurse hesitated before replying. "Your heart stopped for about 5 minutes. The doctors were just about to call it when your vitals suddenly came back. It's remarkable. Really, a miracle. 5 minutes. It felt impossible. Everything I had seen, everything I had learned, it felt like it had lasted hours, even days." My parents rushed into the room shortly after, their faces pale and strained. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked as though he had aged years in a single day. "Alhamdulillah," my mother murmured as she hugged me gently. "Praise be to Allah that you're alive." I wanted to tell her what I had seen, to share the truth that had been revealed to me. But as I looked at her tear-streaked face and my father's guarded expression, I knew it wasn't the right time. They wouldn't understand, not yet. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. I replayed the experience over and over in my mind, desperate to hold on to every detail. The love I had felt in Jesus' presence, the clarity of his words, and the beauty of heaven were etched into my soul. But alongside the joy of knowing the truth came the weight of responsibility. Jesus had given me a choice to stay in the perfection of his presence or to return and share what I had seen. I had chosen to come back, but now the enormity of that decision was sinking in. How would I explain this to my family, my friends? How would I even begin to tell them that everything I had believed about God, about faith, was wrong? When I was strong enough to have visitors, I asked to see Sophia. My parents were reluctant, still believing she was just a classmate, but they eventually agreed. When Sophia walked into the room, her face lit up with relief. "Edis," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I've been praying for you." Once we were alone, I told her everything. I recounted my collapse at the bookstore, my journey toward the light, and my encounter with Jesus. I told her about the love I had felt, the truths that had been revealed, and the choice I had made to return. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down her face. "Edis," she said softly, "this is incredible. God truly works in mysterious ways. I always prayed that you would come to know him, but I never imagined it would happen like this." Sophia became my anchor in the days that followed. She brought me books and helped me understand more about Jesus and his teachings. Everything I learned confirmed what I had seen during my near-death experience. But as my understanding deepened, so did my awareness of the challenges ahead. Sharing my story with Sophia was one thing. Telling my family was another matter entirely. I knew they wouldn't take it well. Islam was more than just a religion to them, it was an identity, a way of life. For me to question it, let alone reject it, would feel like a betrayal. Still, I couldn't keep the truth to myself. One evening, after much prayer and reflection, I gathered my parents and siblings in the living room. It was the same room where I had learned to recite the Quran as a child. The same room where we had prayed together as a family countless times. I told them everything, my doubts, my questions, the dream, and finally, the encounter with Jesus. I spoke from my heart, trying to convey the love and truth I had experienced. When I finished, the silence was deafening. My father's face was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How can you say such things?" he demanded. "After everything we've taught you, after everything Allah has done for you, how can you turn your back on your faith?" My mother was crying softly, clutching her prayer beads. "Please, Edis," she whispered. "This is just confusion from your illness. Once you're better, you'll see the truth again." I tried to explain that I wasn't confused, that what I had experienced was real, but my words only seemed to make things worse. My siblings looked at me like I was a stranger. My younger brother, who had always looked up to me, turned away in disgust. My sister ran from the room in tears. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. My parents tried everything to change my mind, pleading, arguing, even bringing the imam to speak with me. But no matter what they said, I couldn't deny what I had seen. Eventually, my father gave me an ultimatum. "If you persist in this madness," he said coldly, "you are no longer welcome in this house. You will no longer be my son." His words cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. But even in my pain, I knew I couldn't turn back. I had seen the truth, and no amount of rejection or hardship could erase it. With a heavy heart, I packed my things and left the only home I had ever known. Sophia and her family took me in, offering me a place to stay and the support I desperately needed. Their kindness was a reflection of the love I had experienced in Jesus' presence, a reminder that I wasn't alone. My journey was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly walking in the light. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I would face them with Jesus by my side. Leaving my family's home was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every step away felt like a piece of my heart breaking. I didn't just leave a house, I left memories, traditions, and a sense of belonging that had been my foundation for so long. But as painful as it was, I knew I had made the right decision. Sophia and her family welcomed me into their home with open arms. Their kindness was overwhelming. They didn't just give me a place to sleep, they gave me hope and support. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking this new path alone. Still, the weight of what I had lost lingered. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I often thought about my parents. My mother's tearful face haunted me, and my father's words, "You are no longer my son," echoed in my mind. I prayed for them constantly, asking God to soften their hearts and open their eyes to the truth. But there was little time to dwell on the past. Sophia introduced me to her church community, a small but vibrant group of believers who embraced me like family. Their warmth and understanding eased some of the pain I carried. They listened to my story without judgment, offering encouragement and prayers. One Sunday, during a worship service, I found myself moved to tears. The music, the prayers, and the sense of God's presence reminded me of the light I had experienced in my near-death encounter. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. After the service, I spoke with the pastor, Father Elias. He was a kind man with a gentle smile and a deep understanding of Scripture. I told him about my journey, my doubts, and my encounter with Jesus. "Edis," he said after listening carefully, "God has clearly chosen you for a purpose. Your story is powerful, and it will touch the hearts of many. But you must also prepare yourself. The path you've chosen is not an easy one. There will be opposition, even persecution. Are you ready for that?" I hesitated for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I admitted, "but I know I can't turn back. Jesus showed me the truth, and I have to follow him, no matter what." Father Elias nodded, his expression both serious and encouraging. "Then trust in him, Edis. He will give you the strength you need." In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. Sophia helped me find a job at a small bookstore, where the owner was kind and understanding. I spent my evenings reading the Bible and learning more about Jesus' teachings. Each verse seemed to speak directly to my heart, reinforcing the truth I had experienced during my near-death encounter. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Word of my conversion had begun to spread within the Muslim community. Some of my former friends reached out, trying to convince me to return to Islam. Their messages ranged from concerned pleas to outright threats. One day, I received a call from a close friend I hadn't spoken to since my decision. "Edis," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "How could you do this? How could you betray everything we were taught?" I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I haven't betrayed anything," I replied. "I've found the truth. I found the love of God in a way I never knew before." He was silent for a moment before responding. "You've been deceived," he said coldly. "If you don't come back, you'll regret this." The call left me shaken, but it also strengthened my resolve. I knew what I had experienced was real, and no amount of opposition could erase that truth. One evening, as I was reading the Gospel of Matthew, I came across the verse where Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The word struck me deeply. I realized that following Jesus wasn't about comfort or acceptance. It was about standing firm in the face of challenges, trusting that His love and grace would carry me through. My connection to Sophia and her church community continued to grow. They became my new family, offering me the love and support I needed to navigate this new chapter of my life. Together, we prayed for my family and for those in the Muslim community who were struggling with questions and doubts, just as I had. One day, Sophia handed me a small notebook. "Write your story, Edis," she said. "What you've experienced is powerful, and others need to hear it." At first, I wasn't sure if I could do it. Reliving those memories felt overwhelming, but as I began to write, I realized how important it was to share my journey. Each word felt like a step forward, a declaration of faith in the face of fear. I started by writing about my childhood, my questions, and the dream that had sparked my search for truth. I described my near-death experience in vivid detail, hoping to capture even a fraction of the love and peace I had felt in Jesus' presence. As I wrote, I felt a sense of purpose growing within me. I realized that my story wasn't just for me, it was for others who were searching for truth, who felt torn between their upbringing and the call of something greater. The more I shared my story, the more I saw its impact. People from all walks of life, Christians, Muslims, and even atheists began reaching out, asking questions and sharing their own struggles. It was humbling to see how God was using my experience to touch the lives of others. But I also knew that the journey was far from over. The challenges would continue, and the road ahead would be difficult. Yet, in the midst of it all, I felt a deep and unshakable peace. I knew I wasn't walking this path alone. Jesus' words echoed in my heart, a constant reminder of His promise, "I will be with you always, even to the end of the age." With that assurance, I took each step forward, trusting that God's light would guide me through whatever lay ahead. Life after leaving my family was anything but easy. The loss of their love and acceptance weighed heavily on me, but I clung to the peace and truth I had found in Jesus. With Sophia and her church community by my side, I began to rebuild my life, step by step. The hardest part was knowing how much pain my decision had caused my family. My mother's tearful pleas, my father's stern ultimatum, and my siblings' cold rejection haunted me. I prayed for them daily, asking God to touch their hearts and reveal His love to them, just as He had to me. One day, I received unexpected news. My younger sister, Amal, had secretly started reading the Bible. She reached out through Sophia, asking if we could meet. My heart leaped with hope, but I knew the risks. We arranged to meet in a quiet cafe far from prying eyes. When she walked in, I hardly recognized her. She looked older, more serious. But when our eyes met, I saw the same spark of curiosity that had always defined her. "Edis," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I've read parts of the Bible you sent. It feels different. It speaks to my heart in a way I can't explain." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Amal," I said, taking her hands, "what you're feeling is the love of God. It's real, and it's for you, just as it's for me. But this path isn't easy. Are you ready for that?" She nodded hesitantly, and we spoke for hours, carefully, quietly. Before she left, I prayed with her, asking God to guide her and protect her. Watching her walk away, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. In the months that followed, I began sharing my story more openly, starting with small groups at church and eventually online. I didn't share out of pride, but out of a desire to help others who, like me, were searching for truth. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people across the world, some thanking me for sharing, others challenging my beliefs, and a few threatening me for abandoning Islam. Despite the risks, I knew this was what God had called me to do. Each time I felt fear creeping in, I remembered Jesus' promise during my near-death experience, "I will be with you always." Those words carried me through the hardest moments, giving me strength to keep going. Today, my journey is far from over, but I know I'm walking in the light. Whatever lies ahead, I trust that God will guide me, just as He has from the very beginning. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, Subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.